Ben, can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and the business that you have been able to build so successfully?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. My wife Kate and I have 6 kids, and we started the business about 6 years ago. It was kind of we kind of fell into it by accident in a way. So my oldest is 14, and when she was born and she was little, she had some developmental delays and some health issues, a lot of food allergies, and we went through this process over about a 1 year period where we were just trying to figure out what was going on with her. And we tried everything. We went to doctors, we went to specialists, we tried different medications. Nothing really seemed to make a dent in it. And out of desperation, my wife had found some stuff about herbal remedies and stuff like that online, and I was like, that sounds like voodoo to me. I was working at a pharmaceutical company at the time, and so that was kind of like the complete antithesis of what I had lived my life to up to that point. Um, but when it's your kid, you do anything that you got to do to try to solve problems. And so we tried a couple of things, and she went from not talking at all to talking in complete sentences in a week.
Oh,
And basically, to kind of give you some context on what was wrong, so she has this gene mutation that's called MTHFR, and basically it affects how the body metabolizes vitamins and minerals. So she was getting plenty of them in her diet, but they were not in the form that her body could handle. And so we needed to give them to her in a different form. And as long as she gets that, she was totally fine. But it was this real eye opening thing. And as we're going through this process, which, that was just the start, it became a genesis that changed everything in our life. We started blogging about what we were doing. And so for about 6, 7 years, my wife was blogging like on a daily basis. And our heart was really just, how do we help people? How do we help other people not spend a year trying to solve a problem like this in their own life? And over time, it got a bigger and bigger following. And one day, we kind of woke up and realized, we're spending 40 hours a week on this hobby business that's reaching 500,000 people a month. We need to do something to change this. And so, January of 2015, we made the decision I was going to quit at the end of that year. And we got to figure out how to turn this hobby into, something that we can make a living on. And that's where we started branching out into some other educational things, started doing books, and we started selling physical products. We had been making them ourselves for about 10 years prior to that point. But we thought, well, if we like them, maybe other people will like them too. And so then in November of that year, November 2015, I quit and went full time. And and now here we are, 5.5, 6 years later. We're a company of 80 people, and which is still, I mean, it's still in disbelief about that. But there's just been a huge appetite for the products that we're making, and there's a lot of people that we're fortunately able to serve. I think the number was 66,000 last year, 66,000 families
wow.
that we were able to serve, and so um, that's kind of who we are, what we're trying to do.
I think that story is starting to become more common amongst people. So I definitely would love to hear some more of the details associated with your mentality coming from the pharmaceutical industry. Uh, because I think so many folks have been through the traditional, I read on your website, I think you call it allopathic medicine,
Mhm.
which is not a term I had heard until I saw it from you. I'd call it Western medicine, your standard care. I think so many people have been through that sort of experience and got pushed out the other side and said, well, wait a minute, I'm not better. I don't necessarily agree with my doctor. I know from personal experience, I've had things where I'm telling the doctor, here's what's going on. And they're telling me, that's not what's going on. I'm like, I'm living inside my body. I know you're a trained professional, but your training is in a very specific thing. And oh, by the way, you're giving me 15 minutes of your time. Like, you and I can't learn much about each other in 15 minutes. And I think that a lot of people are now starting to turn away from that and it's like a pendulum, right? Everything swings in different directions, and it goes too far, and then it goes too far this way. And I think we're probably sort of swinging. I mean, a lot of people are very dubious of like modern medicine after the COVID thing. But I'm interested to hear your mentality going into that, coming from the pharmaceutical industry, saying, I think you called it voodoo. I would call it woo woo, right? Like that. Come on, this can't work, right? Maybe tell me about that.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, there's quite a bit of historical and cultural forces that are behind all this stuff. But what we think of as modern medicine is technically termed allopathic medicine, and there's a lot of different types of medical care. Herbalism and allopathy, aromatherapy. Those are probably terms that most people have heard of. And you've got things like chiropractic care, and there's a lot of disciplines of Eastern medicine. But the thing is, you take for granted the situation that you're in if you don't study the history behind it. And allopathic medicine started in about 1870, 1880. And while it is the dominant health form today, it is not the oldest. It is, even outside of the US, it's not the dominant health form. Like, just to give you an example, so in Europe, about 40% of babies are born either at home or in birthing centers, unmedicated home birth style births. And so just because that number is 1 or 2% in the US doesn't mean that that's normal on a worldwide perspective. Um, and and so, like I'm sure you and most of your audience, I grew up thinking that Western medicine was the only modality. Um, and to be clear, right, I don't look at herbs as like the solution to every problem. If I get shot, I'm not going to rub some herbs in the bullet wound and hope that I get better. I'm immediately going to the hospital. And so there are things like trauma care where allopathy is easily the right choice, right? Broken bones, cuts, those sorts of things. There's no other form that's going to be able to take care of you the way that allopathy does. But on the other side of that, allopathy is probably the worst health modality for things like cold and flu and just general health practices. This idea of, well, it doesn't matter what your physical health is, it doesn't matter what your diet is, we're just going to give you this medication and that's going to solve all your problems. And it's like, well, maybe diet has something to do with this. Um, and so it was a real transformational process for me that I think probably took 10 years before I really got to the point where I'm like, I trust herbalism with my life. So 4 years ago, I was in a car accident. It was pretty severe. Just to give you an idea, I got rear-ended and I got hit so hard it broke the seat that I was sitting in.
Mm.
And so I got a lot of damage to my back and my legs. Um, I did not see a doctor. I had X-rays done to make sure that what the damage was, but between a chiropractor and using herbalism stuff, that was all I needed. No pain medication or anything like that, because there are tons of herbs that will give you all the benefits that a pain medication drug will, but none of the side effects to it. And so I think it's as you experience it for yourself, it changes your perception of things. And like my parents, who grew up, in the 60s and 70s when everything was switching to like processed kind of things,
Hmm.
right? My mom was on hypothyroid medication for 20 years, and it had progressively gotten worse as she got older. And it got to the point where they said, we're going to have to take your thyroid out. You're going to be on medication for the rest of your life. And I said, I'm begging you, let me try to help you before you do this thing that you can't undo.
Right.
And she trusted me and she said, whatever you do, I will do it. Just tell me what to do. We took about 3 months of diet changes, putting her on some herbs and different things like that. And she was able to get off the medication completely.
Wow.
And that was about, I think, 6, 7 years ago, something like that. And she hasn't been on it since. And that's considered one of those things that's an irreversible
Right.
kind of a thing.
Yes.
And it's not to say that story that like that's the case for every single person,
Yes.
right? There is no miracle cure. But I think the biggest problem that I have with Western medicine is they try to treat you like you're an average. And the story that I love to tell is if you get a bottle of aspirin, it'll say on that bottle, if you're a kid, take one. If you're an adult, take two. Okay, so you're telling me a 90-year-old woman who weighs 80 pounds, two is the correct dose for her. And a 400-pound, 20-year-old guy, two is also the correct dose? No, that doesn't make any sense at all. Just because two is the average dose doesn't mean that that's the normal dose. And so I think what originally drew me in from an Eastern perspective was just this idea of treat everybody like they're an individual, because guess what? We're all individuals. What works for you may not work for me, or even what works for you may not work for your own brother or your own father, someone who's biologically almost identical to you. It could still be different. And so I just love that approach of start with individualized care and also work your way up. Start with the thing that's least risky.
Yes.
And if you've got to go to surgery or you've got to be on medication, that's totally fine. But I'm going to exhaust the simpler options before I jump to that immediate thing that might cause irreparable harm that I can never come back from.